Hello all. In today's session, we are going to discuss on two topics. First one is editing and the second one is proofreading. So to begin with editing, so we all know that editing a given text is the process of organizing and revising the text itself. So, editing it also involves the process of looking at each and every sentence carefully and to make sure that it is well designed and the sentences serve its purpose. The given text serves its purpose. So, to start with the process of editing, there are three C's which is to be had in mind in the during the process of editing. So the first one is clarity, the second one consistency, and the third one is correctness. So to begin with clarity. So clarity, as we all know, whatever is being edited should be clear. So should be clear in the sense there are different stages of clarity that has to be attained in the process of editing. So, the first one, when you begin to edit, you should never tamper with the unusual figures of speech or idiomatic usage, which means that the language that is used in a text should be simple. So, it should be readable, where the reader should be able to read them in a very clear manner. So, the subject matter should be conveyed in a very clear manner. So, in order for that to attain, the simplicity of language is very important. So, where we're adorning it with heavy figures of speech and idiomatic usage may distract the meaning of the subject itself. And the next one, you should know when to make an editorial change and where to suggest it, and when to suggest the editorial change, or where should a point be deleted, or as an editor you should also be aware of the repetitions. So these, when all these are done in a proper order, it gives a clarity to the text. And you should also, the third point is to fix the queries. To you need to fix, or you need to question the unambiguous statement, the confusing statements. So confusing statements, so sometimes the writer might have meant in a different meaning, and which might have double meanings, so different double sentences, so which might confuse. So in that case, it is the duty of the editor to question the writer exactly what he meant and convey it in a simple and clear manner without any confusion. So because chaotic statements may lead to chaotic conclusions of the text. And the fourth point is that the editor should make sure the author has a clear sense of audience, purpose, and focus. So the text, whom is this text meant for? So the author must have intended to write it for the purpose of, it could be for as a research paper which is meant to be read by the common man, the layman's. Or suppose sometimes the research paper might be might the researcher, I mean the writer might intend to write for the purpose of the scientist to read that paper. So in that case, he might be using the context of that writing will be completely different. So you should always look into the purpose and the audience behind the text itself. So that will also, it not only helps the audience or the readers, but it also helps the editor to edit accordingly. And check the thesis statements, topic statements and transitions, where thesis statements are nothing but the what is going to be the crux of your text. So, and the topic sentence. So, topic sentence is going to introduce the reader to what is going to be discussed in the rest of the text. So, all these things, it is the duty of the editor to look into and edit the thesis, topic sentence, and the transition. Transition is nothing but where the editor sometimes he might shift from one subject to another subject. So in those places, he has to look into the exact place where the transition takes place, and is the coherence maintained when there is a subject shift. And the next one is to address excessive passive voice, because passive voice is going to make the reading heavy. So it has to be conveyed in a very direct manner. So that can be attained only when it is written in an active voice, which is simple and direct. So this is with clarity. So when all these steps are followed, at any text can attain clarity in the process of editing. And next, coming to consistency. So consistency is something where things have, the certain things have to be balanced. So when it comes to the spelling or hyphenation, so if the first word, the first time and when a word is used, it has a spelling, the same spelling has to be maintained throughout. Suppose for the first time when you're using a word where you're following the British English structure, then throughout the entire text, the same structure has to be maintained. It has to be consistent throughout. So it not only sticks to the spelling but also to hyphenations, abbreviations, punctuations, and number treatment. So number treatments are nothing but the numerals or the spelled out number names when you mention it, and the table format and the citation format. Suppose if you're employing the MLA or APA format, in that case, so the same has to be maintained. So if you're writing your or framing your bibliography in such a manner, so the same format has to be followed throughout. So including the formatting and the font size, so everything has to be looked at, and there should be consistency in everything. And edit chapter titles and subheads for consistency. So editing chapter titles and subheads means nothing but if at all a chapter has a subheading, it has to be consistent throughout. So all the other, wherever it is required, the subheading has to be given, titles or subheading has to be given, and the same has to be given in the content section also in a right manner. So it should not be like the content page has a different page and the chapter title, and the inside the text it has a different title. So the subheadings also need to be given. uh, the consistency of the subheading should also be looked into, and the subheading and or the title chapter title should match with the text itself. So that is the most important thing. So the content of that paragraph and the title given to that should be correlated. And the next one is the organizational issues, understanding of the organizational issues and the pacing problems. So which is nothing but the sentences, when they are once the sentences are coherent, they will have, they will get an organizational structure, so that there is no confusion in the during the process of reading. And if at all the author forgets to add some subheadings, in that case, or he neglects intentionally, if the author neglects to add some subheadings in those places, it is the duty of the editor to look into the places where the subheadings are required, and he has to check with the author before he or she adds the subheading. So this consistency includes everything, including title, subheadings, spelling, hyphenation. So everything should be maintained the same throughout the text. So this is all with consistency. And now moving on to correctness. So correctness here is nothing but checking the facts and figures. So facts and figures, if you are mentioning a fact, if there is a fact mentioned, it might be a valid and authentic one, or sometimes it may not be an authentic one. So that depends upon the author, but as an editor, it is the duty of an editor to check the correct facts and the figures. Suppose if there is a fact mentioned, such and such event happened in this year, so in that case it is the duty of the editor to cross check whether it exactly happened in that same year, because it is not that the editor should look into only the grammatical errors or spelling or hyphenations and punctuations, because editing also involves the process of looking into the contextual errors. And next one, write down the solution in the margin. So when you are correcting, if there are any problems, issues, which you find, which as an editor, which you can't perform that action, in that case, it is always best to note it down in the margin so that the author, when he or she looks into it, he will change it accordingly. And check the sources. So check the sources is if at all the author has quoted any quotations from another work. Again, if he or she has mentioned the sources, again it has to be cross-checked or cross-verified. And watch for plagiarism. Plagiarism is the most important. So we obviously refer to different texts, but it is the duty of the writer to to cite them in the bibliography, and it is the duty of the editor to check whether all the sources have been cited in the right manner. And the next one, query missing information. So sometimes the author might fail to add some important significant information of text. So again, it is the duty of the editor to look into the missing information and get it checked from the author if anything needs to be added. And prepare the front matter for book. Suppose if it is a book, if you're editing, if the text that you're editing is a book, in that case, the front matter for books is very much required. So the title, cover page, the preface, the content page or forward if it is required. So all these needs to be looked upon. And the last one, skim through the manuscript again to catch errors you missed while fixing other problems. So it is not just in one reading or at one stretch you will be able to complete the entire editing. So in those cases, it is always go for a second reading and second checking of whether what you've done is, whether the editing that you've done is right or whether you've missed out anything so that it can be corrected. So now coming to the process of how to edit. So there are so many ways that we edit. So going to the traditional method, it was just a pen and paper where the editor sits and edits. So nowadays we have other technical aids which you can get, where you can use computer programs and aids such as grammar checker or spell checker as a first step. So but that is not going to be the end. You should not be, as an editor, the editor should not be completely dependent on these aids. So you should just use it as an assistance in the process of editing. So these aids should only assist you but should not replace an editor. So always have that in mind. So first thing on in the process of how to edit is use a hard copy and give yourself a few days or at least a few hours between drafting and editing. So it is always better to stick to the hard copy because there you may not miss certain important details. Maybe if you're comfortable editing, it might be comfortable editing on a computer directly, but there are chances for us to miss a few important details. So it is always better to have a hard copy, and every line that you are editing, read them aloud and try to listen to yourself. It's better to listen to yourself as you read. So that's when you know where a pause is required. Suppose if there are any errors in punctuation, so you can rectify it then and there when you read it aloud. And use a feedback from past work to learn which grammatical errors you make consistently. So you might have you might have referred to other previous editing works, so you may know where the author goes wrong. Where is he consistently going wrong? Is it in grammar or is it in spelling or is it in punctuation? So you just refer to the history and then start the process of editing and ask a friend to peer edit. So as an editor, it is not it is always not fair to be overconfident in our process of editing. It is best to ask another. Peer editing always makes the editing a perfect one and ensure clarity and correctness of sentences. So whatever sentence that you edit, each and every sentence should be coherent and each and every sentence should be simple. So this completes the process of editing itself. And now coming to the second section of our video, which is proofreading. So proofreading, you might think editing and proofreading sound the same. So what am I going to do in the process of proofreading? So there is a subtle difference in the process of proofreading itself. So starting with the outcome. So what are we going to discuss and how will you be benefited uh, by this session of proofreading? So first you will be knowing, we will be discussing about the differences between editing and proofreading. And the next one, rules and confusions of proofreading. So there are a certain rules which you are expected to follow when you are a proofreader, and the symbols and abbreviations used in proofreading. So as proofreading is done at the end of end of the process of writing, after drafting the final, I mean the rough draft. So so it involves certain symbols and abbreviations as a proofreader who uses it in order to notify the errors. So it's not the duty of the proofreader to sit and do the entire process. He is not going to complete it, but he will just be notifying the author about the mistake. So in order to notify, he uses certain symbols and abbreviations to correct the mistakes. So, starting with the definition of proofreading. So, proofreading is the process of reviewing the final draft of a piece of writing to ensure accuracy, impression, and professionalism. So, as we saw, editing can happen even in between the process of writing, whereas proofreading can happen only after drafting the final draft of a piece of writing, where accuracy, impression, and professionalism should be ensured. So when it comes to accuracy, we take into account spelling, grammar, and punctuation. And when it comes to impression, tense, tone, and intent are to be taken into account. And when it comes to professionalism, the overall appearance, clarity, is that work, I mean, has it got a professional look overall? So these are the things that we look into in the process of proofreading. And now coming to the differences between editing and proofreading. So the first one, editing. So as you know, if you see in the process of editing, we don't go deep into the grammatical and other nuances. So it is the surface level where you stick to the content, structure, style, and the sources itself. Whereas in the process of proofreading, we look at the word choice, spelling, punctuation, and grammar. So this sounds, proofreading sounds highly technical, whereas editing looks into the context, the overall organization of ideas. So is focused in editing, whereas in proofreading it just focuses on the grammatical structure of a sentence, or how is it framed, and the word choice. So suppose if there are complex words which is being used, where you try to simplify, and all such things are involved in the process of proofreading. So once again, just a quick revision on editing. So editing is just done throughout the writing process. As I told you, it is, you need not wait to edit at the end. So even while writing, you keep on editing, you revising. So you have that, as a writer, you have that liberty, and the editor can also do the same, with special emphasis on the middle and final draft. So most of the times it is done maybe during, I mean, at the middle or at the during the final drafts, but you still have that chance to edit even while you begin it. And this focus is on the technical issues, so where the flow, word choice, grammar, transitions, and the technical inconsistencies are focused in the process of editing. When it comes to proofreading, this is exclusively reserved for the final draft. So this focuses on the mechanisms and the presentation. So for the final draft, once it goes through the proofreading process, so that is going to be the final. So it just discusses about the mechanics of writing and how to make that text a presentable one. So these are all the things that are involved in proofreading, where we look into the spelling, punctuations, format, and typo error. Sometimes we might be negligible of the typographical errors. So it is the duty of the proofreader to look into the typographical errors. And here is another slide which shows the differences between editing and proofreading. So as you see, editing again deals with the structure, sources of information, task requirements, and the style. So proofreading looks at the details, so word choice, grammar, spelling, and punctuation. So these are like the subtle differences that you can find between editing and proofreading. So now coming to proofreading itself. So there are a few prerequisites that a proofreader should have. So the first one, attentiveness for detail. So he is not going to look into the context of the writing or the subject of the writing, but each and every detail of that text should be looked into. And the in-depth knowledge here, the knowledge of language is very much required, because you are going to correct the mistakes in the language which is being used. So you should be, as a proofreader, one should be proficient in language in order to perform the task. And a proofreader should always have an excellent written and oral communication, and they should have that ability to meet the deadlines and the familiarity with digital tools. So as we discussed in the process of editing, it is always best to use a hard copy, but when it comes to proofreading, it is best to use a hard copy, but at the same time you should also be equipped yourself with the digital tools. You should have that flair or familiarity over the digital tools on how to use and the symbols, and you should have that quick movement over the digital use in the process of proofreading. And there are a few strategies which you need to follow during proofreading. So the first one, read the paper slow and out loud, and use a ruler or blank sheet for sentence lines, and highlight every punctuation marks. So each and everything has to be followed without fail by a proofreader, and use the search function, and you need to track frequent errors. So then and there, wherever you find errors, it is your duty to find the errors and mark it in the same place. And remember to proofread only one kind of error at a time. Suppose if you are looking at the punctuation, so it is always best to focus on the punctuation throughout, so that you don't miss any part of it. Suppose if you're looking into the spelling, first check the spellings entirely and then take the next task, which will help you to complete the entire process itself. And use an automatic grammar spelling checker in the end. So though we think that we are accurate, sometimes we might fail to notice certain errors. So it is always better to set the text undergo the process of a grammar or spell checking technically, and try reading the text backward. So this is a most important step which a proofreader should have, because we are used to sometimes if you're looking into the spelling errors, we have that mindset to assume that, see, when you read, we may not notice certain words, certain mistakes, spelling mistakes. So when you read the same text backwards, the chances of finding out the spelling mistakes are more. It's not just spelling mistakes, even the grammatical mistakes. So it is always, you should try at least. It's not possible. Suppose if it's a voluminous work that you are going to proofread, it is not possible to sit and read the entire work backwards, but still remember this step, which is going to serve when you are editing a smaller text. And moving on to the next one, rules. So there are certain rules which has to be followed in the process of proofreading. So first is word choice. So word choice, you should, as a proofreader, you should always look into the word choices which the author had chosen. I mean, word which he has preferred. So use a specialized language. So use a specialized languages. Sometimes you may have to rectify certain errors, and you may have to suggest certain changes. So in those cases, the proofreader should be accurate in pointing out the changes, suggesting those changes, and be concise. So be concise is be precise, be short and crisp in whatever you are conveying, and no slangs. So no slangs, an example is without that being said, or try just to make you understand. So these are like where you are going to beat around the bush to convey the things instead of conveying things directly. So where this is where the slangs has to be completely avoided. And the other one is to avoid qualifiers and intensifiers. So qualifiers, where if you want to emphasize on a subject, where we start she was very bad, or she was very good, or extremely good, in order to emphasize on the quality of that person or on the quality of something. So better look for a direct word which will cover everything. So instead of using it, so this makes your text sound very normal. It doesn't give that professional look to your text. So these are the things which the proofreader should remember when he proofreads a text. And coming to grammar, so as a proofreader, one should become familiar with the rules of grammar, syntax, spelling, punctuation, and usage, because those are the most important things, steps involved in proofreading. And every sentence, you should always look into that. Every sentence should contain all the grammatical elements, including subject, verb, and object, which is nothing but the subject verb agreement should be looked at. So whether, suppose if he says, if a sentence goes like John likes to play, so it has to, the John likes to play, so subject is John, and it is a third person singular, likes. So likes, because it's third person singular, the verb takes the es form. So John likes to play. So in that case, if at all the sentence is given as John like to play, so the proofreader should be ready, I mean should be able to rectify that mistake by saying it should be John likes to play, where you should be confident of the subject verb agreement. And nouns and pronouns should match. So these are like very subtle mistakes that might happen due to carelessness or due to ignorance. But as a proofreader, you cannot make excuses saying that it is due to carelessness, because the proofreader has to be proficient in finding out these mistakes in grammar. And coming to punctuation, so we all know that a small change in punctuation can change the entire meaning of the sentence. So the punctuation has to be used correctly in a sentence, and the commas has to be used at right places, and the apostrophes had to be used for right reasons. So each and every punctuation has its own meaning, so it has to be used accordingly at the right place and at the right time. And coming to spelling, so you can use spell checkers, but as I told you, use that spell checker should only assist you, but it should not replace you. And the spellings of the words that you use often, so you should always know the, I mean know the spellings of the words. There are certain technical words, so we all know most of the spellings, but when it comes to technical proofreading a technical text, so you should be very much familiar. For example, the word diarrhea, So that's quite confusing, an ambiguous word. So you should be very much clear about those kind of spellings. And coming next is the tense of the sentences. So each and every part of a text should be written in a particular using a particular tense. So that has to be hand in having. I mean that should be, the proofreader should bear that in mind before proofreading it. So the first one, the abstract. If you are editing a piece of paper, research paper, so the abstract should always be in the past tense. And coming to introduction, present tense, because you are going to introduce the reader to at the present situation. And review, we all know that we are going to look into something which has been done in the past. So obviously review has to be in the past tense. And methodology, past tense, because the methodology, so you are going to record the methodology that was practiced, I mean that was employed at some point in the past. So it has to be in the past tense. And the results. Results, again past tense, because you have collected the results, or you have arrived to a result in the past, and this is just going to be a report. Your research paper is just going to be a report of what you have gathered or collected. So result should also be in the past tense. And coming to discussion and conclusion, so these are the two things in a research paper where you would be using it in the present tense. So these things should be borne in mind. And confusion. Sometimes there might be the confusions. Here are the list of common confusions that we have during the process of proofreading, or even during the process of writing. So confusions between homophones. So there, they are, and they are. So homophones are nothing but the sounds which have different spelling but they sound the same. So confusion should, so when you are marking that, you should always be careful, because if when it's mentioned as there, you shouldn't use the hyphen, I mean the apostrophe. So even when the writer, when you're proofreading, you should also look into these common confusions in the text. And misuse of definite, again the articles also plays a major role in the confusing, I mean the word choice confusions. So that also needs to be looked upon. And misuse of prepositions. So prepositions is again a very common mistake that you can find. It might, some people are ignorant of where to use the exact prepositions. So that also needs to be looked upon. And do not use contraction. So contraction doesn't make a work sound professional. So it's always better when it comes to academic writing. It should never be used, the contractions. And choose the words that are simple and clear. So any work that is used should be very clear, and it should not sound awkward, and the language which is used should be precise, and the sentence should not be, you should not drag the sentence. And now coming to the misplaced punctuations. As we saw, punctuation is it has that power to change even the meaning of a sentence itself. So it is always better to look into the punctuations, I mean the right place of the punctuation and the right use of punctuations. And the confusion between hyphens. So hyphens are nothing but m dashes and n dashes. So we have m dashes are nothing but the hyphen, it's like the dash which is in the width of the letter M, the capital M, and the N dash is in the width of the capital N. So M dash is usually used to separate, to distinguish two clauses. So where the meaning of that the first clause is carried forward in the second. So in order to separate that, you can use the M dash. Whereas in the N dash, so from this year to this year, when it involves this numerical or the number of years, so that's when we use N dash. And the stylistic inconsistency, this should also be looked upon by the proofreader. So sometimes the language which is being used, the conventions, UK or US language, I mean American or British English. So that has to be, again, as we saw in the editing, the process of editing, that consistency has to be maintained. Suppose if the author uses British English from the beginning, it has to be followed throughout the paper. And inconsistent capitalization. So capitalization, certain terms requires proper capitalizations and titles. So again, the consistency has to be maintained, and the numbers should also be maintained. Suppose if the tabulation that's titled in the third chapter is like 3.1, so the fourth chapter, it should go accordingly, where there should not be any discrepancies in the numbers when it comes to chapter titling or the tabulation titlings. And formatting issues, which talks about incorrect formatting of quotations and citations, or inconsistent paragraph indentations and spacing. So this comes to formatting. So the line space, the font size, and the page indent, so all these comes under the formatting issues. The page numbers, header, footer, all the overall appearance of the text is under comes under this formatting issue. So it is the duty of the proofreader to look into the formatting text. And here are some proofreaders tools. So these he or she can use these following tools in order to guide through the process of proofreading. So dictionary, thesaurus, grammar book, red pen, and lack of fear. So one should be confident when one starts to proofread a text, so which will lead him or her throughout the process in a successful manner. And these are the common proofreading symbols. So the first one is to capitalize. These are the marks and the meanings of those marks. So you can just look into the marks, and each and every mark has its own meaning. So whenever the proofreader has to, suppose if a word has to be capitalized, so he need not mark that it has to be capitalized, or he need not directly employ that he directly change that, but instead he or she can use that symbol. So where when the reader reads it, I mean when the author corrects it, he will correct it accordingly. So a slash, which means to make it as a lowercase, and there is this curve which states to reverse the word. So here are the list of proofreading symbols which you can go through. And again, as we have symbols, we also have certain abbreviations. So the abbreviations, suppose if it's AB, which means it's faulty abbreviations. And if it's AGR, there's the agreement problem where subject verb doesn't agree. If you look into the example that's given, a basket of puppies were in the kitchen. So it should be a basket of puppies was in the kitchen, because it is the a basket. So the verb should agree to the noun basket, and it's not about the puppy. So when there are such mistakes, the abbreviation AGR has to be used. So in the same way, each and every mistake has its own abbreviation and its meaning, which can be employed in the process of proofreading. And a few tips and tricks. So like the do's and don'ts. So first do's, repeat the process of proofreading more than once, and look for typing or grammatical spelling and punctuation errors, and pay attention to frequently misspelled, typed incorrect words. So it is always better to revise. You might be confident, but you should not be overconfident in your own skill of proofreading. So it's better to revise it again and again in order to achieve a complete text. And don'ts, proofread during editing and writing process. As we saw, proofreading should always be done only at the end of the writing process, at the final draft, because you might come back to the same mistake again if you proofread in the beginning itself or somewhere in the middle. So it's always best to proofread. It is mandatory to proofread only at the end, and proofread only certain part of the document, and spend too much time on the proofreading process. So certain part of, if you, once the process of proofreading should involve from the beginning to the end of the text, so the first word till the last word. So that's how a proofreading should be done. So these are the few do's and don'ts which is involved in the process of proofreading. And here is the exercise which is given. These results indicate that drug X is more effective than. So the text is given with the mistakes. And as you go through the text, you can find the mistakes and the errors are displayed here. So, so these are the two topics that we have discussed today: editing and proofreading. And I hope these two are clear, and you must be able to differentiate between editing and proofreading. Thank you.